Welcome inside the School of Communications here at Quinnipiac University. I am Assistant Professor Nick Pietruszkiewicz, and this is the latest episode of What's Your Story? I am incredibly happy to welcome in Quinnipiac's Director of Athletics, Greg Amodio. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate it.
So the most important question I have is probably the first one. Do you get to choose whether you're the Director of Athletics or the Athletics Director?
I kind of go with Director of Athletics.
Sounds more distinguished?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so.
All right. I was wondering if you get to choose or it's just given to you.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of thrown at you. And
Okay.
there's been some people along the way have said, well, you know, you've been doing this for a while. How come you're not a VP? And I said, yeah, I kind of like staying in the shadows, so I'll stay with Director of Athletics. It
Okay.
keeps me out of harm's way.
You're a few weeks from 10 years on the job here, right?
Yeah.
Has it felt like 10 years?
In some ways, it feels like it's been way longer than that. And in other ways, it feels like I just got here.
Okay. People when they take a job, they do their homework, right?
Yeah.
They know or think they know what they're getting themselves into.
Right.
What surprised you most about this place when you got here?
I think it was the level of commitment. You know, when I took a look at the job, and at the time it was being run by DHR International, which is a search firm that the university worked with, and I had not worked with them before. There's probably 4 or 5 major search firms within college athletics that you deal with, and I knew most of them, but didn't know Glenn Sugiyama, who ran the search for the university. And as you did your analysis, you saw the infrastructure and the upgrades that were made and the commitments and things of that nature. So I remember when I first came and did a face-to-face, it was up in Hartford at the Marriott. And they do one of these deals where they roll somebody else in every hour and they rip through like 8 people in the course of a day, and you just hope you're in a good spot where they're not just so worn out they don't want to talk to anybody anymore. And Glenn said, you're going to go in and you're going to stand up at the end of the table and you're going to give a little presentation about who you are and what you're all about, and then you're going to sit down. And I said, okay. So I did that, and I was here, and John Leahy was straight across the table, and there were a couple of other folks from the university and a couple of folks from DHR. And the first question was, why are you here? So I looked at John and I said, well, listen, at the time, I'm 53 years old. I'd like to think I'm in the prime of my professional career, and I'd like to be at a place that's trying to compete for championships. And I said, the great thing about this place is that you're not just trying to win conference championships, you're trying to win national championships. And I said, that's appealing for a guy like me. I still had 3 years left on my deal at Duquesne, but I wanted to be at a place that cherished success, both in the classroom and in competition, and I felt like that's what you had here at the university.
So we've done this 6 or 7 times now. And the first actually official question I've asked to Tim Kirkjian and Jimmy Roberts and Matt Berry is all the same is, what was your this is what I want to do moment?
With being a director of athletics?
If I want to be involved in sports, because I think
sports.
Your path to director of athletics is a circuitous one.
Non-conventional. Yeah, I was a phys ed and health major in undergrad, and then went back to school for my master's at Queens College in exercise physiology. I wanted to get in something that was related but unrelated, and ended up meeting one of the professors there, a guy named Paul Fardy, who was involved in a research project working on coronary artery risk factors in minority adolescents. And on top of teaching and coaching on Long Island, going to school at night and getting involved in this research project, it broadened and opened my eyes to things beyond just being what I thought I'd be for 30 years, a high school teacher and a high school coach. When we got done and I finished my degree, he looked at me and he says, have you ever thought about getting out of teaching? And I said, well, not really, but what are you thinking? He says, well, I'm on the board at the American Heart Association in New York City. And he said, they're looking for somebody to run all the school and community site programs for New York City. So I went through the whole process and did the interview, and I went from going to work in shorts and a sweatshirt and sneakers to getting on a train and commuting into the city and working in the Channon building across the street from the Chrysler building and doing that. Did that for about a year and a half, and I got something in the mail, because we're going back to the days where there were no cell phones and internet, folks. Went back and got a note from a cousin of mine who is a golf pro down in Virginia. And he said, I got this PGA employment bulletin, and he goes, there's a job in there for a manager of golf promotions. It sounds like something you'd be interested in. Well, I look, and they wanted association management. I was doing that, the American Heart Association. They wanted a teaching background, coaching background, a newsletter background, because they had a PGA Junior Golf Journal, and I had started a fitness news brief for all the health teachers in New York City. So I looked and says, well, geez, I got all this stuff. I'm just going to apply. And I had probably like 3/4 of a page of a resume. The next thing I know, they're flying me down to Florida, and I'm interviewing with all these different people down at the PGA and PGA of America. So they oversee the PGA Championships, the Ryder Cup, all of that, and then all the golf professionals. The next thing I know, they're offering me the job. So that was my foray into sports management, and again, not a direct path. Did that for a year and a half, and my wife and I had our first son, Jake, and felt a little disenfranchised and away from the family. So we were looking and said, you know what, we're not going to go back to Long Island. We're done with Long Island. Where are we going to go? And Kerry, my wife, had a sister in Cincinnati, and we decided to go to Cincinnati. And I actually stayed home for a year with Jake while my wife went and got a job. She's a physical therapist. So I, again, unconventional. I was a stay-at-home dad. Mm-hmm. Tried to work the system and the circuit and figure out who was who in Cincinnati, and somebody knew Skip Prosser, who was the head basketball coach at the time at Xavier. Met Skip. Skip says, well, I can't use you, but let me introduce you to the associate AD for marketing, Mike Herman. So I talked to Mike, and I say to Mike, listen, here's what a deal I'll make with you. I'll come and work for you for 6 months for free and show you what I can do. I'm married, have a child, living in Cincinnati, and he says, yeah, that sounds like a good idea to me. And I said, now listen, I'm coming with some background. I'm not 20 years old. I'm now 32, 31. And I said, give me something I can work on. Well, something I can work on was anything from filling pretzel bowls in the Musketeer Lounge at basketball games, to slinging hot dogs out of the cart at a soccer game, to selling baseball outfield signs back then for $1,000 a pop, with no database and all that. That was going through yellow pages to get contacts and trying to call maybe 80 people to sell one outfield sign. After I did that for 6 months, they created a job, and I became the assistant director for marketing. That was my first entry into college athletics, and did that, assistant AD, associate AD, and after 10 years of doing that, I did an assessment and decided, okay, what do you want to do next? I got offered some opportunities with Learfield and ISP in that space. I interviewed for a D2 job right up the road in Westfield State.
Okay. To
see if D2 or that level was what I wanted to be, and then Duquesne popped up. Duquesne being in the Atlantic 10 where I already was, and had an opportunity to interview there and become an athletic director after 10 years of being at Xavier.
Can we go back to the conversation you had with your wife about working for free?
Yeah.
How'd that go?
Well, she figured I was sitting at home anyway, and and we had my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, so thankfully they were happy to help watch Jake and do those types of things. But I'll tell you what, back then, in the early grind of my tenure, you're talking 60, 70-hour weeks. Small athletic department, lots of events, a lot of success in Skip Prosser to Thad Matta to Sean Miller in those times. So Pat Kelsey, who's the head coach at Louisville, was on the team when I was at Xavier playing. That's how far we go back. Chris Mack, all people like that. So I've had a chance to be around a lot of good coaches along the way.
But that decision to say, I want to bet on myself and I want to take that chance. Like, how important is that you got students here in my journalism class, most of them are about to head out into the world. Like, how important is being willing to take that chance and see where it leads?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely critical. And it's one of the things we talk about all the time in regards to getting as much experience as you can get while you're here during the studies. Anything you can do to help build your resume and exposures along the way that you can have are absolutely critical. I was starting cold, so again, some PGA experience, right, which was really good, but I knew nothing about college athletics. I had great mentors. Jeff Fogelson was the AD, and Jeff ultimately left to become the AD at Seton Hall. And then Mike Babinski came in, and he ultimately is now the AD at Purdue. So I had really good people. Mike Herman had left, and that's how I moved up to assistant AD. Mike Herman left to become the AD at Niagara. So, opportunities presented themselves along the way that I took advantage. But yeah, it's a hard one, especially like I said, like you're sitting here right now going, would I work for 6 months for free right now coming out of school? I was doing it at 31, 32 with a wife and a child at home. So not sure whether it's the same measure. That's a few years ago in the overall scheme of things. I'm 30 years into my college athletic tenure now. But yeah, sometimes you just got to bet on you and look at the value of the experience, and can that lead you to the next level?
I was working for my first job out of college, I was a small newspaper in Chicago. I was covering the Cubs and the White Sox, and I got an interview, which they've heard, all of them have heard this story. I got an interview with the New York Times. I bombed. I went in trying to guess what they wanted to hear instead of answering the questions the way I wanted to, but I knew I could do the job if they just gave me a shot. So I went back, I worked 2 more years in Chicago, and I remember sending, and I've never told this story, I remember sending a handwritten note to the sports editor at the time saying, I will come and be your summer intern.
Yeah.
I'll give away my full-time job, my salary, all the stuff I'm getting. Granted, it wasn't much of a salary. Give me 3 months.
Right.
If I can't do it, I can't do it.
Yeah.
But I believe enough in my abilities, and if anybody knows, everybody who's had me here bunch of times, is I live on self-deprecating humor. So I don't have that much confidence in myself, but I'm like, I got to take a chance. Like, this is what I want, and I know I can do it.
Yeah.
Somebody's, hopefully at some point. It worked out. 14 years at ESPN was good, but that New York Times, I mean, like you got to take a shot sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and once you get that shot, it's one of the things I've taught both of my kids who are both in the sports side of business as well, especially when they had internships. Be the first one to put that hand up when you have that internship, because it doesn't take long. Because when you always put your hand up, what happens is after the just first or second time, and you're the one to put your hand up, they stop asking everybody else and they just come to you, because they understand you're the reliable one and you're the one they can count on, and become the go-to person. That's critical.
Yeah.
You just don't be present, but also be incredibly active when you're there.
So during my time as a reporter and then as editor at ESPN, I have 2 older brothers. I have a bunch of friends who never quite understood my job. They thought, yeah, just go sit in the press box, have a couple of hot dogs, write about the game, and go from there, and we'll see you at like 9:30. And I'm like, that's not how it works. What's the biggest misconception or the thing people don't understand about your job?
It's pretty much the same. they see me at games and think, hey, the dude just gets to hang out and watch games, and it's all the logistics behind the scene. We're dealing with a staff of almost 100, 475 student athletes. Everybody's got their own issues of the day. We're trying to manage the day-to-day elements of what we do. And then we're in a tumultuous time in college athletics. Everything from the house settlement to the transfer portal to NIL to all those different types of things that you didn't have to manage to now all become part of the various elements that you're not just educating your student athletes on, but also your staff. You're getting everybody to understand how do you best position yourself for success in today's market.
You've been here 10 years, which is a good amount of time, but in the life cycle of college athletics, it's a very small window. Right. It's changed considerably since you got here. How complicated is college sports right now? Very
complicated, because you're trying to figure out what your space is. We'll look at the example of, say, men's hockey. In men's hockey and women's hockey, we're trying to be nationally competitive. We're trying to be nationally competitive, top 10 programs with an expectation that you're going to go to the NCAA tournament every year. And within that, you're trying to compete for a national championship. I mean, we've played 3 times for a national championship. I mean, in the last, 13 years or so? I mean, that's pretty impressive. And then in other programs, say men's and women's basketball, we're looking at the MAC conference where we've got 12 other teams, and in the MAC, pretty much whoever wins the tournament, who plays 3 days really well in Atlantic City, is the team that's going to the NCAA tournament. really hard to get an at-large bid. So in that case, if my goal is to hit the NCAA tournament, I just need to be better than 12 teams. I don't need to be better than 64 on the hockey side. I just need to be better than 12. So each program has its own circumstances to determine what the level of success is. And you've got to look at that based on assets that you've got committed, where is the pecking order in terms of regional nature. So we'd say Northeast, like lacrosse would be something that people are trying to be good at, because we're in that market where we're getting student athletes from upstate New York, down into Long Island and into Maryland, and we're able to take advantage of that. So, it's just trying to figure out what the prioritization is as you're going day to day, and then how we fit, not just in our day to day, but how are we fitting into the institutional strategic vision? How do we help support the strategic plan through athletics is another guiding light that we use when we make decisions.
Is it less fun?
I wouldn't say it's less fun, but it's just more challenging. And we're also, we're in, from administrations as well.
Yep.
So, I understand, and Judy and I have an unbelievable relationship, and we're very much in lockstep, but also knowing that we'll have a new leader down the line, and what that all means for how we fit into the institutional profile.
When we talk about job interviews a lot because they're headed out into that market, I've done it a bunch of different times over the course of my life, and you sort of understand it a little bit. But when you do interviews, you're interviewing for, what goes into an interview when you're deciding that's the next coach of my whatever, pick a sport team?
Some of the things are pretty basic, and you might look at me and go, really? Passion, energy, you gotta show you care. Because there's a lot of people out there that are just kind of like going through the cycle. I'll give you an example. My daughter is 30 years old, and she's a senior director of a PR outfit in New York City. And she's now got 24 and 25-year-olds working for her. And we'll have professional conversations, and she'll go, these kids that are working for me, all right? And she goes, why don't they have the drive and what she perceives as the drive they need to have to be successful? It's pretty easy, and it goes back to my whole who puts their hand up first. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people trying to figure out, you know what, until somebody tells me different, I'm going to do my 9 to 5, and I'm going to go home, and that's how I'm going to live my life. And there are other people who are sitting there going, yeah, no, I'm going to put my hand up, and I'm going to be that person that you can count on, and that's going to be critical as you go down the line. I'm shocked, and we see this, really post-COVID. So if we had an assistant director for marketing job, an assistant director for athletic communications job, we get 125, 150 resumes. Now, we're lucky to get 25 or 30.
Really?
Yep. And I think the most significant reason is listen, when you're an assistant director coming in, just like I said, assistant director, my first job, 60, 70 hours a week. You're working weekends, you're working nights, you're traveling with teams, the whole bit. And people are sitting there, and you're not getting rich in that first job. So people are sitting there and going, okay, they're talking to their friends and going, they're working remotely, they're working from home, they're done at 5 o'clock every day, they don't have to work nights, they don't have to work weekends. I would have to be a bit nuts to be doing that job. Why wouldn't I do this? So I don't think it's as appealing as it used to be from that context.
Okay.
I think it's still a great jump-off point for people to get great experience, but I think people are just viewing it a bit differently.
Without giving specifics, what's the worst interview you've ever had? Or what's an example of something that went sideways where you stared at a coach and like, yeah, this ain't gonna work?
It wasn't even so much a coach. It was for somebody for a lower level, an entry level, I shouldn't say lower, an entry level position. And rolled in with just like khakis on and just a polo and sneakers, and they had their phone in their hand. That was it. No materials. When I asked, I always say, what can I tell you? But no, I think everybody's answered everything for me. I'm good. And I remember that person leaving and calling both of my kids and going, okay, you have to tell me whether I'm nuts here. This is what just happened. Am I wrong to feel like that's not the way people should be? No, I I would be mortified if that person was in front of me for an interview and all those types of things. That was probably the most dejected I was.
Right.
Because I'm going, wait a second, is it me?
Yeah.
And then my kids gave me the affirmation that it wasn't me, which at least made me feel a little bit better.
I've worked in sports and in academia, so I have these conversations. My wife is a nurse and now sort of an executive position, and I have this conversation like, does this happen in the other part of the world, or is it just me? A lot of the times she'll
Right.
just look at me and go, it's you, you're nuts.
Yeah.
And which I admit to, that's who I am. But you try to, like, how do you roll in with just your phone and not be prepared at all?
Yeah, it's, when that just sets the tone for what type of colleague and an employee you'd be within the department. So, and listen, I'm not talking about a glossy presentation. When I've interviewed coaches, I had a guy hand me a book that fat for a head basketball coaching job. And it's spiral bound, and it's all these different, what I do in my first 100 days, and what I did here, and what I did here, and what I did here. And I'm like, what's really most important to me is us having a thoughtful, engaged conversation as opposed to this giant book. And then when I went through the giant book real quick and I skimmed, it was just a pick and replace. And there were a couple of school names that weren't my school in the materials. And I went, yeah, that's why you don't do this. So, and that immediately was like, okay, that didn't really make me feel like you had the true focus. This was just another job you were interviewing for. You weren't really interested in my job. It was just a job.
If I put you in charge of all of college sports, you're the emperor of college sports, it's the first thing you fix or change.
First, all my business cards from director of athletics to emperor would be awesome.
Emperor Czar is
yeah,
the
I
two
like czar,
the two
czar
I
of
would go with,
athletics. The biggest thing for me is that this business used to be about relationships. It used to be about taking time to recruit student athletes, recruiting their families, getting them to understand what the value proposition of our athletic program was, the value proposition of the institution, them coming with an expectation that they would be with us for 4+ years, and we would nurture them along the way to become better student athletes, but better students, and that they then would graduate and become engaged and thoughtful alums. And that has all kind of disappeared. It's all become transactional, and it's not about the things we've preached for years, which is family. And frankly, even more disappointing, it's not about the education anymore.
Right.
So, and I think that really needs to be recommunicated, that 98% of the student athletes who are getting all this money are not going to play at the pro level. The majority are going to make their living and their career off of having a degree from a fine institution, and that's how they're going to live their life. And we're not talking about that anymore. And even when you go back to, when people talked about the transfer and you had to sit out a year, the sit-out year was not about penalizing the student athlete. The sit-out year was about them being able to catch up academically, because typically you lose credits when you transfer. Without the burden of playing your sport, you'd have an opportunity to catch up on your academics so that you would still graduate in 4 years. That was really the intent of the sit-out year. It wasn't a punishment. Now, it became a punishment in the conversations about, well, coaches get to go in, they don't have to sit out, why do student athletes have to sit out? But that really wasn't the reason behind all that.
So, is college sports broken?
It is broken right now. I don't think we can say it's not broken, because there's still so many unknowns, and we're still, the rules still aren't set. Remember, NIL and a lot of those things are state-to-state legislation. They're not federal. So the original version of NIL laws in Connecticut, we all agreed as institutions not to allow marks to be used. Well, it didn't take UConn long to figure out, wait a second, if Paige is in a National Gatorade commercial, I want her wearing our logo, and so does the rest of the university. So a year after we did that, it got changed, and now the university marks. So you're seeing a lot now, the LSU women's basketball player, well, she's in her facility wearing her gear, That's not just good for her, that's great for the institution, it's great for the SEC, all those types of things. So that's why those things have all changed as we move forward. Will there be at some point federal intervention? I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why you have the commissioner you have. The former governor of the state of Massachusetts, the NCAA realized we don't really need an executive director, we need a lobbyist to oversee and work with the federal government on what does it look like so everybody's playing by the same set of rules, because right now we're not.
You have a high-profile job. There comes with that criticism. Some people ignore it, some people fight back with it. How do you handle when someone says, man, the job isn't going the way we thought, or this team's not winning as much, and
Yeah.
it falls on you? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I don't take it personally. I really did. Probably as a younger man in this business, I probably did. At Duquesne, my son also went to Duquesne while I was there, and Jake would check out the message boards every once in a while, especially when basketball wasn't good.
Bad.
And he'd get really angry because I was getting thrown under the bus. And I'm like, hey, it is what it is. Like, I can't worry about the chatter out there. There's always a reason for why you have success or you don't have success. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some cases where you look, and over the course of my time of being an athletic director, I would sit there and question and go, like, we should be better in that program. When I look at the comparative assets that we have to the rest of the league, and whether it's staff or operating or facilities and all that, like, we have top-tier facilities, but we're always coming in the bottom tier. Well, then I have to assess and say, okay, well, I don't have an asset problem, I have a management problem. We're not managing to the assets correctly. And then there's other programs that you're going to have that, you know, everybody can't be fully funded, everybody can't have unlimited resources, and in some cases you're not giving the max resources comparatively, you're giving middle of the pack resources. And if you're getting middle of the pack results, I look at a coach and go, we're getting out of this what we're putting into it. At some level you have to be realistic about where the program is or where your entire athletic department is on the food chain.
So I have a couple more, and then we're going to open it up and let the students that are here ask the questions. You look for success, and you judge it in different ways probably. But if you're chasing the big shiny prize, what was the national championship like 3 years ago?
Yeah, it's funny. So the first time the hockey program played for the national championship, it was in Pittsburgh, and the arena is directly across the street from Duquesne. So I wasn't at the game. My son went to the game, and you know, so we had that exposure. Then I get here, and my first year is 15-16. Women's hockey and men's hockey, I think, lost 3 games between the two of them. And I went, this hockey thing's really easy. Like, you know, I remember talking to the union AD, who was chair of the hockey committee. And he's like, my gosh, like, what an unbelievable year. Like, first year, like, you're playing for the national championship. And I went, you know what, this has nothing to do with me. This is about the president, about Jack McDonald, who laid a great foundation. You know, I'm just trying to keep it on the rails. I said, unless we win this whole thing, and then I'm taking the credit for everything. So when you get to 23, you know, we had been there before. We knew what that experience looked like. We weren't that far off. We got a little bit closer every time. It's just monumental because it's the grand prize for everyone. It's the grand prize for the institution that built that arena for $50+ million up the hill and had a great vision. For the athletic department and all the people, the Billy Meccas of the world who have been here for 47 years and are striving for excellence. It's a point to validate, you know, and we talk about athletics being something that brings the university together, brings our alums together, brings the local community together, and, you know, winning that is the crowning achievement, I think, for everybody's career.
Puck's in the back of the net pretty quick.
Yeah.
Like, did it register? Did you understand? Like, did it hit or take a second of like, wait, holy
So
bleep?
I watched the game, not with my family. I watched the game, and ultimately my son came with me in a suite that they gave us, an empty suite where the guys who didn't dress for the game sat up in the suite, and it was me and my son, Brajesh Patel, our strength and conditioning, and maybe one other person. And nobody talked the whole game. We just sat there and watched. And then it goes to overtime. And I go, okay, I got to switch this up a little bit. So I go down, and I'm down in the spot where the goal's right there. So I'm in that hallway area, and the locker room's back this way. And it's me, again, my son, Victoria Arlen, who's on ESPN, and her dad, Larry, who was the goalie here on the hockey team. And we're standing there watching, and as you know, it happened in a flash. So the first person that jumped in my arms was Larry. And then Jake ran off to go be with my family. And even, you know, the culmination, listen, it's not easy for the families either, you know, of coaches and all that, and even administrators who, you know, 6, 7 days a week, nights, the whole bit, you know, to see my kids on the other side of the glass in tears, knowing what it takes to get there, and the culmination of not just my professional ride, but a family ride, was really like the most impactful thing. To see them and to see former alums, hockey players in tears, guys who had even played for the championship, didn't get it themselves, but felt like they got a piece of it now.
So you needed to change it up. Are you superstitious in general, or the national championship just brings out weird things in people?
Yeah, no, I don't think I've ever been superstitious about a lot of things. I just felt like, you know what, I can't sit here for another 15 minutes. Like, I have to get and move around. And listen, we're going to get to overtime, and the game's going to be over. So I'm either going to be heading into the locker room to you know, hug everybody in victory, or hug everybody in a loss, one way or the other. So, so I'm glad it worked out the way it did.
All right. You ready for some questions from them?
Yeah, sure.
All right, let's do it. Mike, we're set? Yep. Tyler, you want to come take that? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tyler. Thank you for coming and speaking to us. I wanted to ask about your comment on relationships versus transactions. How is Quinnipiac's athletic department forging, you know, that idea of relationships rather than transactions?
Yeah, I think one of the things we've really pushed forward with in the last year and a half is building out our student development and mentoring program. We always felt the need to, and again, part of that whole value proposition, and how do we nurture our student athletes at the highest level. So we've got a whole curriculum now for first years through seniors that you go through modules during the course of your time here, whether that be on personal brand building, on personal finance. There's some mental health types of things in there, bunch of NIL education. Like, we had Open Doors here, who's one of the big groups that does. They were here all day yesterday doing information sessions with our coaches, our student athletes, on building personal brand to generate NIL. And I think that's been a critical component in terms of wrapping our arms around our student athletes and letting them know that we care. And it kind of bears itself out. I mean, we're only, you know, a year into this, but we had 4 student athletes present to the board back in the fall. And a couple of the student athletes said the student development pieces that we now have incorporated have been phenomenal, and wish we had those in place for the last few years. So that's kind of that bridge building and making sure, and that whole mentoring. We've got about 80 student athletes tied in with alums in their field who are now doing one-on-one mentoring via Zoom, via personal interviews, those types of things, just somebody they can go to for advice. And at the end of the day, this is all about having a happy and healthy alum who gets a job and always wants to come back to the Q and be part of the family.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ethan. When you look at the department as a whole, do you sort of, when you try to tweak things or fix things, do you look inwards at the program, or do you look at sort of other conferences, other schools, and try to adapt that to your own sort of department? How much do you sort of take from other?
Yeah, you have the general athletic department, you know, and that's trying to be strong across the board. But, you know, it's a different view when we're looking at, say, men's ice hockey, because we're competing with blue blood national programs like, you know, Denver and North Dakota and BU and schools like that that have won multiple national championships. That's a way different comparative than, say, you know, where our tennis programs are. And our tennis programs are very good, I think, as everybody knows. But their ability to succeed is a different level than what it is for hockey. From looking at the management piece of it, you know, sometimes it's about trying to move assets around internally to support certain mechanisms. Athletic fundraising and fundraising in general, corporate sponsorship has become critical. anytime we can bring in external revenues to help support what we're trying to do with our programs is important. And then there's always the, the conversation I'll have with Dr. Olian from time to time of, hey, you got any interest in helping with this and moving this to the next level? And again, she and the university administration has been terrific in terms of investment in the program in terms of making us sustainable.
Hi, I'm Amanda. The question I have is just, you're talking about how some of our programs are kind of competing at a national level, and then there's also competing in the MAC. Does there come a time where you're looking to have all of those programs elevated beyond the MAC, or do you find certain sports are kind of like, we're really good in our conference and
Right.
that's kind of where we end, whereas
Yep.
you could see men's hockey, women's hockey, and then even looking at basketball as nationally recognized?
Right. Yeah, it all comes down to, asset management and how much do you have to invest in a program. In some cases, we look at things, so we make an investment in hockey, and there's an investment in public relations and marketing and support and all that, but we also generate revenue through corporate sponsorship and ticket sales. That same revenue generation opportunity isn't the same for our cross-country programs. So, and that's not, our women's cross-country programs won 3 conference championships in a row. So we've had sustained excellence in a lot of different programs. But that's really what we're looking at, and then trying to figure out also, where do we fit within the institutional strategic plan, and how do we continue to support that? I'm sure going to go through another strategic planning phase, and we're going to see how athletics can best position itself to support that, with all of the different competing elements out there, especially, like we said, with the changing nature of NIL, the NCAA, and even, you've got to factor in the political climate as well, and what's happening geopolitically and how that impacts assets and things of that nature as we move forward.
Much of your day is spent talking about money.
I'd say assets.
Okay.
Because some of that's personal assets, but yeah, it is. You're trying to figure out, where are we as we're having the conversation from a communication standpoint. You probably don't recall, but pre-COVID, we had hired a full-time broadcast individual to oversee all the athletic broadcasts, and we had hired a full-time creative, like a content person, video person. And we made the move because we felt that was important. It was important to tell our own story. It was important from recruiting and those types of things. And unfortunately, when there were cuts made during COVID and we had to give some things back, we lost those 2 positions. So now we're trying to figure out, how do we resurrect that, more than anything, the broadcast position, because we've got a lot of elements that move with that, what we do up at the arena, and then all the games we're trying to broadcast. We've got our 4 athletic communications staff trying to do that now, but also trying to do their classic jobs of game day stories and post-game write-ups and all those types of things. So how do we move some dollars around to figure out how to create that broadcast position again? Because if we do that, it frees up the athletic communications folks, and they can do a better job of storytelling, and we're kind of missing out on that right now.
See if our sports communications program can help you out starting in the fall a little bit.
Yep. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, we've had great conversations, and we've got new deans here in communications and in law, and we've had extensive conversations where we've all sat at the table with law, business, communications, athletics. We've sat together talking about creating a sports innovation hub for true practical hands-on experience. We've talked about kind of undergraduate capstone types of things. I even talked to 2 of the deans about, we really need to, in my opinion, booster our student group, or creation of a student booster group. I said, do you think we could get 1 undergrad out of the sports comms and 1 undergrad out of the business school if we were able to give them like a $5,000 scholarship per year to be the president and vice president to help oversee a student booster group? You think we could have some success there? So, we realize we need to invest. It's not just us asking for support. How do we invest, and how do we make it worthwhile?
Helps when you got a law school dean who's a hockey coach.
Well, that's not hurting us. Brian's been really, really good, and he's jumped right in, which has been a real positive.
Hi, my name is Carlos. Coming off from that question, is there a plan to add any specific sports in the next years for Quinnipiac?
There is no plan to add any sports. I think that'll be a conversation that takes place once all the dust settles with the NCAA movement and the House settlement. We'll have a better understanding of what the landscape looks like, and I assume we'll continue to have conversations with administration as we move forward to, again, as a new strategic plan unfolds, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that they want us to get larger from an athletic standpoint? Do they want us to maintain? One of the main points of emphasis has been the club program, which just 4 or 5 years ago, it really didn't exist, and now it's pretty vibrant, and using that as a driver to create enrollment and attract students to the university.
Hi, I'm Tony. You talk about the long hours, the unusual hours that comes with being in sports. How do you maintain a work-life balance and make sure that you're not always bringing work home?
My wife is often sitting next to me at most of these events, so and that's the truth. I mean, I had one of those moments where we were driving home from whatever game it was on a Sunday, probably 3 months ago, and we pulled in the driveway, and I just looked and I go, how many nights and Saturdays and Sundays have we spent on campus over the last 30 years? And you're unable to calculate it. But I guess I was just making a reflective point of like, we've been doing this a lot for 30 years. But my wife, God love her, is a sports fan, so she's pretty much at most of the events. And the nice thing is Judy and Pete have been active participants and fans of our programs. We watch a lot of games with them during the course of our time. And my family's constantly with us as well. We're sitting here for Easter and talking about everybody going, so we're all going to the Icebreaker in Arizona in October. And my kids are all for that, especially if they're on scholarship. But those are the things we talk about. We plan around athletic and going to Belfast again. Are we going to Belfast? And so like I said, my family's in the sports business. My son Jake was in college athletics up through COVID. And now he works for a talent management group out of Australia in the esports space. Bunch of 12 and 14-year-olds with millions of followers trying to figure out how to monetize themselves. And my daughter was the lead of a sports division for a PR group in New York City. So they've all migrated and stayed in that sports area. So everybody's all in.
You ever try to talk them out of it?
Oh, yeah. So when Jake called me, Jake at the time was working in the athletic department at Notre Dame in marketing. He had done Rhode Island, he was down at Mississippi State for a couple years, and then he was at Notre Dame. And COVID hit, and they were doing some of the furloughs like we were all doing. And he goes, I'm thinking like this might be a time to like make a move. And I said, that's the smartest thing I ever heard you tell me. And he came home for the holidays, and he got a job in January working for Playfly down in Philadelphia in their esports, and that's how he migrated into the esports space. And he's still in Philly and doing that, and but he's just still in esports, but on a total opposite side, not doing tournaments and all that. He's doing the talent management piece.
Ben?
Hi, Greg. My name is Ben. Thank you for coming, first of all. My question revolves around how do you navigate relationships with coaches who have very different approaches to the transfer portal and NIL and the changing landscape of college athletics?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because we had a coaching session yesterday morning with Open Doors to talk about all the updates in the NIL space and what it all looked like. And I took the time at the end to say to everybody, well, so we just spent an hour listening to the evolving market and more of the conventional, of building your personal brand, going out into market, going down to Eli's and saying, hey, for $500 in gift certificates, I could do this for you, this for you, this for you, or some cash, like the true of what NIL was supposed to be on the front end. And they were talking about how to build that brand, how to penetrate the market, all that. And then I looked at the coaches in the room, and there were a bunch of assistant and head coaches, and I said, so does this make sense? Does this all make sense? Because to me, it makes sense, because if you can do this during the recruiting process, it's a positive. And if you're helping, along with our student development, building a personal brand and understanding how to communicate with entities outside of campus, like this should all enhance the value proposition of being a student athlete here. And I got a lot of different answers. I got this makes total sense, blah, blah, to, we got a lot on our plate already. And I said, well, a lot of this isn't driven by you other than maybe reminders, to your student athletes. It's really driven by your student athletes. Well, classes and all that, blah, blah, blah. I go, listen, I've been on those buses where kids are cracking through TikToks for 3 hours on the bus. If they can crack through TikToks for 3 hours, they can spend 15 minutes on their personal brand. So I said, I don't want to hear that. So, and then I had a coach who says, well, this is all more about individual. It's not about team, and we're trying to promote team. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I get that. But each individual in your program is an individual with their own personality, their own pathway, their own wishes and dreams. We should be trying to nurture that collectively. So with all that said, when I look around the room, I'm not going to waste a bunch of time administratively with programs that aren't interested in engaging in this. But if I've got a handful like, hey, we're all in. Like, we think for all the points that were made, we think this is great. All right, let's go. You 5, let's go. We'll nurture you, and we'll nurture your student athletes. And ideally, we'll come up with some pretty positive examples where people go, okay, maybe I should be doing that too.
Jake?
Hi, I'm Jake. I really like your son's name.
Yeah.
But I just want to ask, when you have to make a coaching hire and you don't have as intrinsic of a knowledge of that sport as you may some others, who are the people you lean on? What are the resources you have available to you? And how do you use that?
Yeah. So each of our sports has an administrator that's the sport administrator. So I've got the 4 up top, and then we've got 3 other administrators that each have 3 or 4 sports. And they're the ones who are the direct day-to-day conduit to the staff, to the student athletes. Like, I can't know 475 student athletes intimately. I try to get to know my student athletes. I get to know their families through recruiting and all the other process, because they're part of that family too. So when we have a position that's open, so for instance, when Becca Main decided to retire and we were looking for a field hockey coach, I didn't lead the search. Sarah Frazier, our deputy AD, who was the sport administrator for field hockey and has the most intimate day-to-day knowledge about how our field hockey program works, she was the leader on that search. Now, it's not that I wasn't engaged in the process, but my engagement came more towards the end. I want those people to be fully engaged in the process of being the quote-unquote GM of their program and having the most understanding and knowledge of what we need institutionally. If you know who our student athletes are, what the best personality will be for our student athletes in that situation. And each team's different when I say that. Like, I've never walked into a basketball team when we made a search and say, okay, who do you think I should hire? But I've walked into a basketball staff and said, okay, change has been made, or coach is leaving, Baker's leaving, here's what we're going to do next. Like, what's important to you in the next coach? What are the attributes you're looking for, and who is the type of person that you think you can connect with? In order to get feedback from the student athletes, I think that's important. And yeah, if it's a whole nother realm, I've known people for 30 years. I can talk to commissioners, other ADs, different stuff like that. We have phone calls all the time, especially if we're in different conferences. Nobody's worried about, what's going on. I talk to still colleagues in the A10, and I'm not competing day to day with somebody in the A10. So we're sharing information pretty liberally.
Did it take a while for you to be okay with not being in control of every aspect, of letting your people do their jobs?
Yeah.
Were you good at that from the start, or did that take a while to say, I can't micromanage and I got to let people do their thing?
Yeah, I think that you mature over time. I can't know what every coach is doing. I can't know what all 100 staff are doing. Can't know what all 475 student athletes, but it's all about process. So when Dr. Olean came on board, she looked at me and she says, okay, you're going to report directly to me. And she goes, how do you feel about that? I go, fine. I reported to the president at the last institution for 10 years. I understand what that is. And I looked at her and I said one thing. I said, Judy, here's what I said to Charlie at Duquesne, and I would say to you. The worst thing that you can ever say to me is, Greg, how did I not know about that? It is my responsibility to inform you of things that you need to know at the appropriate time that you need to know them. And in 7 years together, she has not looked at me and said, Greg, how did I not know about that? Now, there's been times I've texted her and I go, you got a second to talk? And she goes, that doesn't sound good. And I said, is it ever good? I said, it's nothing big, but you just need to know. Same type of thing in this system. Like you have to trust your administrators to let you know what you need to know and when you need to know it. I don't know everything that's going on. You know, I know the majority, and if something escalates or we have a hot button issue, it gets to me. And if I think then Judy needs to hear it, I let Judy know. So as long as you have the established protocols in place, I think you can live your life with some sanity.
Best boss I ever had at ESPN, who's an adjunct here, who you've met, is Patricia Mays, and her basic rule was, don't ever let me be surprised.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you do your thing for the most part. She thought I was a dummy a lot of times too, and I am. But the big thing was, don't ever let me be surprised.
Yeah.
Connor.
Hey, Greg. Nice to see you. Thank you for taking the time to be here. I wanted to ask you, you've been in college athletics for 30 years now. What was the moment where you were like, okay, I belong here and I belong in college athletics?
You know, I got fooled at the beginning because I started at Xavier, and they had a significant commitment to men's basketball and athletics, and great leadership with Father Jim Hoff, who had come from Creighton and decided, hey, we're going to brand build institutionally off of basketball. It's going to be part of the way we do this. It was a Marquette Creighton guy. So it's like, okay. So everybody was all in on that. So I just assume everybody did it that way. So my tenure there, even though, you know, I worked up the food chain and all that, we had a lot of success, so it was fun. You know, on the women's basketball side too, we had Melanie Balcom, who went to Vanderbilt, and Kevin McGuff, who then left and went to Washington. So we had even really good women's basketball programs, you know. So we were very, very fortunate in that regard to be able to do that. So the moment where like I got struck in the face was then I go to Duquesne. And my first year we're 3-28 in basketball. And I know going in that I'm going to make a change. But it's like, okay, now I've got to figure out, like, this is all on me now. Okay? It's all on me. I better pick the right person. And they had not had a winning men's basketball season in 15 years. And hired Ron Everhart from Northeastern. And in year one, we won 10 games. In year two, we won 17 games. And in year three of Ron's tenure, we won 21 games, went to the finals of the Atlantic 10 tournament, lost, but went to the NIT. At the same time, our women's basketball program had won 20 games for the first time. So after my fourth year, if I was really, really smart, I would have went, see ya, and got both programs to winning 20 games that hadn't happened before, and left on George Costanza and left on a high note. But I said, no, there's more room here, you know. But I thought that's where, you know, okay, I can do this. Like we can get where we need to go. We're going to have to exercise patience because this is not easy, but we can continue to get better and continue to move this thing forward.
Well, there are sports that there's a lot of money exchanging hands. NIL, hockey, basketball are the ones. Are there conversations about potentially adding a GM-like position or someone that can oversee that money?
Yeah, I'm off the GM thing a little bit because I think when you say GM, you're talking a little bit more about somebody who's in the process of recruiting, is in the room, is trying to sell the university and all that. I see it more as a director of NIL type of thing. I need somebody to manage whatever partnerships, and frankly, it's a fundraising job. You know, it's probably 75% of that it's more of a development job. How do we raise additional dollars, whether it be through corporate engagement, through personal fundraising, things of that nature, other ways that we can raise revenues to funnel into that path. I see it more in that, more of an administrative and fundraising role, as opposed to somebody who's sitting there and saying, hey, I'm going to be calling up and making this offer to this guy or this gal for $250,000, $300,000. Like, that's not the role as I envision it. Could change, but as we sit here right now, because we're not going to be a program like Notre Dame that's sharing money with 300 or 400 people. Like, the dollars just aren't there to do that.
Right. Brandon?
Hi, I'm Brandon. What does a typical summer look like for you when every team is in its off season?
So it's interesting because, you know, men's and women's basketball, men's and women's hockey, are pretty much here 11 months out of the year. They go home for a couple of weeks in May, and then they come back and they hit summer 1, summer 2. They're training. Hockey's, the ice is out. The ice just came out. The ice won't go back in until like the beginning of July. But they're here working out with Brajesh and bigger, stronger, all those types of things, taking classes so that they can stay up to speed. And basketball, you have summer access to your student athletes. So at any given time, even during the summer, there's 70, 80 student athletes running around campus. And then you're planning, you know, all summer long for what the fall's going to be like. So there's a lot of logistics work, a lot of planning. You know, by the time baseballs and softballs and all those are done, it's into June. And then your fall sports are coming back the end of July. So that window just keeps getting tighter and tighter. So really what it looks like, I mean, that's where everybody, I encourage everybody to take the downtime they can. You know, can you grab a Friday? Can you do something? You know, now we're all used to working from home, so you can do some things from home. I don't get caught up on that either. People are like, hey, I'm just going to work from home for today. I'm like, awesome, you know. And then we've got coaches who are out recruiting. That's when you have the AAU circuits and all those types of things. They're out at volleyballs, basketballs, all that. They're out recruiting for a good chunk. You know, it's the time for everybody to go get their vacations in, you know, and get a little bit of downtime with their family. But it winds up kind of late for us, and it winds back up pretty early.
Hi, Greg. Khalees here. My question is, how do you help teams like tennis and golf that get less attention feel appreciated like the winter sports like hockey and basketball?
Yeah, the key there is we've got really good people leading those programs. And you know, they're in a good spot. Obviously, having new tennis courts is a nice add to that. But Paula and Brian have done a great job there for years. You know, those are the people I have great admiration for because they've figured out how to make it work here. Brian does not have a full fund of scholarships. Paula is much higher up in terms of the full max of scholarships. But you know, we want to continue to praise those sports because year over year they do a great job, and the same thing with the women's golf program. So you know, I've traveled with all those programs when they've gone to the NCAA tournament. I've gotten on a plane and met them down there and walked the course and all those types of things. You know, as soon as we win something, it goes immediately to Judy. Judy then hits the coaches and makes sure that we have the connectivity there. You know, and just, you know, praise them along the way. So make sure that they get the accolades they deserve because they've done a great job in those programs in terms of sustained success.
What's your favorite thing about game day preparation at the arena?
Game day preparation. I guess it's just, you know, when the crowd's coming in, especially, you know, when you're talking about hockey, if we're playing a big opponent, you know, if you're playing BU or BC or obviously the Yale game, there's such a great buzz in the arena, and people are super excited about what the day is going to be like. There's nothing better than when we get that occasional Friday night basketball game on ESPN, and we load up a bunch of promotional specials. We throw maybe a beer special in there, and the place is packed, and it's packed with students. You know, because at the end of the day, this should be a student-based initiative. I mean, we're doing a lot of the things we do, and it should be peer-to-peer support of what we're trying to get done. You know, that's when we can create those environments in there. I think that's the best part. Now we just got to work on the parking up there a little bit and figure out some of those issues, but we're working on it. But yeah, I think it's the general buzz, and especially when we have a big game coming up and how excited people get.
Anybody else? Is this it? Is this the question, or is this a different one? Okay. I was waiting to see if this was your closer question. Okay, we're not there yet, though. Okay, well, let Connor go first.
So when you're looking for someone to get advice from, and maybe it's not somebody from the athletic department, who do you rely on, and what are those conversations like?
Yeah, I've got a tight network of probably 3, 4, 5 ADs at other schools, and you can always tell, like I'll get a phone call or I'll call them, and you can always tell what the context of the conversation is going to be. Because when I say hello and the first response is, what are we doing? Why are we still in this thing? I know it's not good. I know there's an issue, and it can go the other way. So you just want to be able to bounce stuff off of colleagues and just get an understanding. And that might be how to manage a coaching difficult situation. You're in a search. Hey, I'm thinking about this person, confidentially. What do you think? Oh yeah, I know this person. I know that person. I've talked to that person. It's somebody you might want to have a conversation with. So yeah, it's colleagues in the business. And then, we've got internal people. I mean, if I'm sitting there and I just want to, woe is me, and I maybe have a conversation with Billy Mecca, who's the department rabbi, and for me, our coaches, our student athletes, that's somebody you can go to and bounce some stuff off, because he's been through the wars and he's seen a lot of things at this place.
Before Ethan asks you the traditional final question we do around here is, so as upcoming storytellers and as people who are going to be doing interviews, what advice do you have for them? You've been on the other side. You've had stories done about you. You've had times where people have had to ask you questions you really wish they didn't ask you that are hard questions. How do they approach that when they come to you?
Well, I think the first thing is it's important for you to develop relationships. So we all know of the legendary Maury, all right? When I first got here with Tom Moore, Maury was doing the men's basketball beat. And he came and talked to me and he goes, don't seem like I can get a genuine conversation with Coach Moore. I said, well, have you spent the time to try and establish a relationship with him? And he kind of looked at me. And I said, listen, within your own circles, you are willing to be forthcoming and have open conversations with people you trust, people you know. Just blowing in with the mic and going, hey, as I've told coaches along the way, I go, I don't care who's asking you a question. You have every right to sit there and go, yeah, I'm not going to talk about that. Like, that's your right. They have the right to ask it, and you have the right to say, yeah, I'm not going to talk about that. So it's critical to develop relationships along the way, because that's how, the relationship you and I have. We have engagements, we chat, we talk, and it could be about QU stuff, it could be about other stuff. But you've taken the time to stop and say hello and get to know me a little bit, and that's only broadened the chance for us to have a broader engagement. So I think that's the biggest thing.
I've told this story to them a bunch of times. I had a similar conversation when I was in Chicago. It took a while. Dusty Baker wanted no part of me. He could not, we just couldn't see eye to eye, and finally knocked on the door of his office and said, can we talk about this? Like, is this something I'm doing? Is it just you don't like me for whatever reason? And we worked it out. But it was, at first, it was probably just too transactional. As I was always just putting a tape recorder in his face and said, all right, I got to ask you a question. You got to give me an answer, and then we go from there. But to understand someone as a person probably helps make that process better.
And you got to remember, somewhere along the way, we're in a little bit more of a gotcha question mode these days compared to the way it used to be. And you got to remember, that person you're talking to may have been burnt once or twice. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yep, no, I'm good. I don't really want to have this conversation. So it's not even you. It's a broader circumstance that person's been involved in that then makes them a little camera shy.
I've been around golf forever, and Tiger Woods got burned early in his career with a GQ piece, and that started the genesis of him just giving you the one word, I'm not really giving you an answer. And so, it could have been, it's nothing to do with you. It's just somebody burned him once, and that was it.
Yeah.
All right. Ethan?
Who's the coolest person in your contacts?
In my contacts?
Coolest can be interpreted anyway.
Oh, jeez.
This is traditional.
There's a lot of people in there. I mean, I got Jay Billis in there, John Rothstein, if you talk about media people. Yeah, and then I have a bunch of coaches in there from all over the country. I don't have anybody that I think you'd be like, this is, I've never heard of that before. But it's probably folks like that I've done business with over the course of time, coaches that I've worked with and people like that. And there's an example. Like, Tom and I will chat with John Rothstein because we trust John Rothstein. Mm-hmm. There's other people that call me in that space. Click. I won't even take the call.
I bet I could guess some of those names
Yeah.
that I used to work with or alongside.
Yeah.
I do, however, I'm with you. I love, of the time I spent at ESPN, Jay Billis is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Love Jay. Greg, I can't thank you enough for being on the latest episode of What's Your Story?
Appreciate the
Greg
opportunity.
Amodio, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate everyone's engagement.
And so I left ESPN 3 years ago and am doing this full time, and I do some freelance work on the side to be still involved in storytelling. You have enough clothes that are,
thought I should
Quinnipiac
represent.
and blue.
Yeah.
I have something because last week, can you hand me that if you don't mind? I don't want to get up. I have something as a thank you because last week I worked for Masters.com as a contributor.
I did see that.
So
on
even though
LinkedIn.
it's the not the correct university colors, I figured
Thank you kindly.
that would either be good for you or a gift to someone you know.
Thanks. I once traded out 2 Masters tickets
Sure.
that I got for some Final Four tickets.
Wow. All right.
And I didn't use them. I gave them, it was my father's desire to go to the Masters.
Okay.
And I traded 4 Final Four tickets for 2 Masters tickets.
And you went with your father?
And I didn't go. He went with a buddy.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't go. So we have been in this lottery for 10 plus years.
Mm-hmm.
My son is focused on this. And this is his life quest to go to the Masters.
I did the lottery for a long time. In 20 years of doing it, I think I won twice. I went as a patron once myself.
Patron.
And then I got tickets for my brother this year, but I've been to the last 8, and it's everything you would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been to, PGA championships, having worked with PGA of America and senior PGA championships and things of that nature. And yeah, listen, I think, it's unbelievable atmosphere to go and be a part of. But golf truly is the ultimate made-for-TV sport.
It is.
Because if you are trying to, don't even think about trying to follow somebody around.
No.
Well, I'm gonna back in the day, well, we're gonna follow Fred Couples. That's virtually impossible. So. You just have to set up shop and you're there and you just take it all in.
Yep.
So.
Awesome. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks. Thank you.